Welcome to A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to My Life. This is the place to be for stories to inspire and uplift when life doesn't go according to our plans. I'm Laura Muirhead, your host and the reigning queen of A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to My Life. I can't wait to share the plot twist stories of my guests that will inspire and uplift you when life didn't follow the plan, right here on A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to My Life podcast. Hello and welcome to this episode of A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to My Life. I am so thrilled to have today as my guest, Michelle Ann Collins. Welcome, Michelle, and come and tell us who you are, what you do in the world, and where you are at.
Hi, thanks, Laura. Thanks for having me. And I just want to start by saying I love the name of your podcast. It is so, and it's so true. There's always a funny thing, right? You know, the saying when man makes plans, God laughs. We just never know what direction or spiral or pothole in our journey is going to come up. So I love the fact that you use the word funny, because ultimately, if we can look back and laugh at the things that changed our journey, it's great progress. So thanks for having me. Michelle Ann Collins. I'm an author, grief and wellness coach, and a yoga therapist, among other things, but the list gets long and a little bit boring. So we'll just stop there. Currently have 3 books out there. You can see them over my shoulder there. And another one coming in the next few months, probably August will be the publication date. I write about loss, grief, trauma recovery, and focusing on the recovery aspect. I've been through several pretty big hurdles in my life, big funny things that happened on the way to my life. And what brought me to my current life is really the unexpected, the tragedies, the difficulties I've had to overcome. And that's really shaped what I'm doing now. People don't go into grief coaching usually from a problem-free background.
Right. And I do know a little bit of your story, but you definitely don't just jump into that unless you've experienced it, I wouldn't imagine. So, and that would also be the best place, in my opinion, for you to coach and to help counsel people. If you hadn't had that experience, then I don't think you would be able to touch people in the same way at all. So tell us a little bit about, go ahead and tell us about your story. I know there's multiple parts to this. It's not just one story. It's a couple of funny things happened on the way to my life stories, and which also isn't uncommon. So go ahead and tell us where this started.
Well, that's a great question, because it's really hard to know, once I arrived I guess let's start there. When I arrived in trauma therapy, after I was married to my second husband, and he died by suicide in 2016. I obviously was in grief, and I developed PTSD from the trauma of the end of our marriage and the loss of his life. And ended up on my trauma therapist's couch. And I really think that that's the beginning of where I am now, learning how to survive and thrive post-trauma. The term post-traumatic growth is becoming more and more popular in scientific psychology literature, and even popular literature now. And that's really where I sort of landed, as far as writing books and working to study grief and trauma recovery. But my grief journey starts back when I was 6 years old. I lost my grandmother. That's my first big loss that I remember. And she was really my person. I connected with her. She was my everyday after school, fixing me Campbell's chicken and dumpling soup. which I don't recommend anymore. But at the time, it was my favorite sustenance. And, I just have such amazing memories of my bond with her. I had three older siblings, and my mom and dad, were often busy with them, but I had my own adult. So when she died when I was 6, I grieved as a 6-year-old would. I kept asking my mom, when's grandma coming home? Because I didn't have a concept of her being gone for good. And I still remember, finally, maybe it was a year or two later, that I realized she was gone and started grieving in the way a 7 or 8-year-old will. That was my first big step into grief. And I look back as an adult now as a student of grief and a teacher of grief management, that was a really big event in my life as far as destabilizing for my childhood.
Sure, I can, yeah, I imagine it would be. I was very close to my grandparents at that age and spent a lot of time with them, and luckily they were in my life, much longer than that. But I can't imagine, because I feel like even the people that I know who passed away when I was younger, like that, you don't have a reference point for that, and especially someone who
Mhm.
was that close to you and really your close caregiver. I can't imagine how that was for you growing up.
Yeah, it definitely destabilized things for me. And so many children go through destabilizing events, and now, science is medical science is really getting a handle on, or at least some deeper understanding on how childhood trauma affects adult health. And it's really a fascinating area of research that they're able to connect, adult health crises or health issues, mental and physical, with childhood trauma. There's
Hmm.
studies about that now. So therefore, once you study it and you realize the connection, then you can begin the process of intervention and education, so that hopefully more people that experience childhood trauma will grow up healthy and able to deal with it, being an adult, which is hard, whether you went through trauma as a child or not.
Right, right. Yeah, it's hard enough. Well, and I love that you said post-traumatic growth. I think that that is a great term, because there, I I have a very close friend who lost her daughter several years ago, and that's what I see. I when you said that, it reminded me of her and made me think, yeah, it is a growth. It is a uh, change in change in your life, a change in everything. And I also think for you, it's one thing if you would have lost your husband to a disease, whatever, physical disease, but to lose someone that you love like that to suicide, that's a whole nother layer as well, I imagine.
Yes, there are. I just actually recently was at a training about the difference that really outlined with bullet points, if you can believe it, the difference between the suicide loss and the other types of losses. Now, there are sudden losses. There are slow. Like when I lost my mom, that was my next big tragedy in my life. In 2007, she passed from leukemia,
Mm.
and it was a 3.5 year uh, battle. And I did, now that I'm studying it, I did the pre grieving, where I found out the diagnosis, and the prognosis was 12 months. She lasted 3.5 years, but um, so I went into grief 3 years before she died,
Yeah.
and that's premature grieving.
Yeah.
um, Yeah, and so that was at the time, of course, the biggest tragedy of my life. And then since then, I went through a divorce, which was also a tragedy, and then remarriage, and then losing my husband to suicide. The extra layers of suicide. There is guilt oftentimes with any death.
Mhm.
We tend to turn to ourselves with the "what else could I have done?" When my mom died from cancer, the "what else could I have done? Could I have made her more comfortable?" that kind of thing. I didn't blame myself for her cancer or her death. With suicide loss, you do that.
Mhm.
It- and of course, I'm generalizing. Not everybody, takes that so personally when they lose a spouse to suicide, but um, it, it's it tends to be connected to how you were before. So if I took everything personally and felt a lot of guilt in my life before his death, then it's like putting a magnifying glass and emphasizing everything. If I was an angry person before he died, I'm going to be an angrier person after. If I was an
Mhm.
anxious or depressed person, it's going to emphasize that. So recovering, it's really challenging, and the suicide loss just adds, there's a lot of finger pointing. Nobody does that when someone dies of cancer. It's my cousin's fault you died of cancer. You know what I mean? So yes, you're absolutely right that is an extra layer, I think is how you said it, um, of challenge to overcome, recover from, heal, grow through the loss, suicide loss.
So I I would imagine, it had been a few years since your mom had passed, before you lost your husband as well. But do you feel like you had time in that during that those years to heal, to grow into, to grieve your mom and be at a place where, were you in a decent place, or was it just, oh my gosh, now another, something more added on? I'm just, it doesn't seem like, you say it's been several years, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, the people who say time heals all wounds. No, not necessarily. It, 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 it makes space between it, but it doesn't necessarily heal it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And when we talk about healing from grief, we uh, we need to decide kind of how to define what does it mean when you're healed. I was actually just talking with a client about this the other day. Is there an arrival? Do you wake up one morning and go, "Oh, I'm healed"? The answer to that is no. David Kessler, who's the world expert on grief, he worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, defining the stages of grief, and then added finding meaning. He had his latest book is actually called Finding Meaning as the sixth stage of grief. He defines the arrival at healing as when the love outweighs the pain. So when you can think of your loved one more with love than with pain. You can really get into the memory of your loved one, bring it forward, maybe finding meaning through their life. Like I have found so much meaning through the death of my husband and my mother by becoming a grief coach and studying grief and loss.
Right.
So that's my own meaning. You don't have to start a foundation or become a grief coach to find meaning. The meaning might be just remembering their smile,
Mhm.
just remembering. And so to answer your question, I had developed a lot of insight and skills as far as the self-care and just requiring me to live a life um, post my mom's death, that it was incredibly difficult because she, like when I lost my grandmother, my mom was my person. I mean, her phone calls to her punctuated every event in my life.
Mhm.
And I had 3 little kids. When she was diagnosed, my kids were 1, 4, and 7,
Mm.
and when she passed, they were, well, 3 years, add 3, um, 11, 8, and 4 when she passed. And so I needed her a lot, and my it was like having the rug pulled out from under me. She really was the just the glue that held my world together. And so recovering or proceeding with any form of life after that was growth. It was, I hated it. I didn't want to grow, but after I was to a point where I could start seeing other people's pain. So I was to the point where I was through my pain enough to be able to sit with others, because my mom died. Most of my friends still had their moms, right? I was only 41 when she died, and I was 37 when she was diagnosed. So um, other people started coming to me when their moms got sick, and or parents, even siblings, were sick and dying. You went through this with your mom. How did you dot dot dot? So I was sort of put into that. And then just 5 years after my mom died, my marriage dissolved.
Mhm.
And I was divorced about 6 years after my mom died. And that, again, once I got to the point where people were coming to me and saying, "You went through this. How do you get through it? How do I get through a divorce?"
Mhm.
So I was forced, in a way, Laura, to get my feet back underneath me, because I have an innate sense of trying to help. That's just part of my makeup, is trying to help. So that was part of my healing. When my mom died, I thought nothing else in my life could ever be as painful or as tragic or as awful, as destabilizing as that. I was sure of it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and that's what I also think, listening to you, and, having asked the question, about healing, is that maybe there isn't ever really healing. Maybe it is like what you say, more of a balance of, not hurting as much, but maybe you don't ever really quote unquote heal from it. That might not even be the right word, but and yeah, when you just when you thought there's nothing that could get any worse, in dealing with your mom. But I also think that a lot of people, or maybe some people, not necessarily a lot of people, I give you a lot of credit for wanting to help others when they come to you for advice. Oh, you lost your mother, and how did you deal with it? I think there are people who would be like, no, no, not me. Don't ask me. I don't, I'm not in a place to help you. It's not for me to give you advice or whatever. And so for you to step into that, and like you said, it's innate in you to be a helper, but some people might not take on that role. And so I think that that's really amazing that you were willing to do that and see that you even take it far enough to become a counselor in it, so that you can help other people. I think that's huge.
Thank you. Yeah, it takes a lot of work, and I don't blame or belittle or think anything negative of someone who just says no. I can't talk about it. We all go our own path when we're faced with tragedy, and uh, just getting out of bed every day. If you're in grief right now and you're getting out of bed, that's a win. Okay, if you're in grief right now and not getting out of bed, just call it. I call those wet days. And when you have a wet day, just let it be a wet day. Do whatever you can. This is the kind of advice I give to people in grief. Whatever you can to get through that day, because tomorrow you'll be a little stronger.
Mhm.
The more you care for yourself, the more you'll be able to be a little bit stronger. And it's not something you have to plan. By Thursday, I'm going to be strong enough to talk to my friend who called me. You just want to keep putting one foot in front of the other. I want to tell you a story about when I was first, I guess, forced out of my grief cave. If you don't mind, is that okay?
Sure. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. This is in my upcoming book, but not in anything that's published yet. Um, about 9 months after Glenn died, my husband Glenn, from suicide in 2016, a friend of ours contacted me to tell me that uh, they'd heard of a mutual friend of ours who had died by suicide. So it wasn't even a year. I was still deep in my PTSD was still developing at that point. It wasn't even fully fully grown. Um, and when I got this call, you have to call her, the wife, the surviving wife. You have to call her. She found him. she's devastated. And my first thought was, oh, hell no. Can I say hell on this podcast? Sorry. Hell, I might, sometimes 4-letter words come out of my mouth when I'm talking about this stuff. So maybe you can just bleep it out. Uh, yeah, I said hell no. I might have even said some other 4-letter word. I couldn't go there. I absolutely could not. I couldn't even think about being helpful to her because I was still so in the grief cave. I was wounded and hiding, and I just, doing everything I could to try to not feel the pain that I was in. And about an hour or two later, this little voice came into my head and said, "You have to call her. You have to. There is nobody who can be more helpful to her than you right now because our husbands knew each other. We were friends. I was it. I was the person she needed to hear from the most."
Mhm.
So I put on my big girl panties and called in my angels and my and God and anyone who can support me here and there, and I made that phone call, and I'm just starting to tear up thinking about it. And that was a really big step toward my healing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can imagine that you at that point would be like, no, no, I'm not in a place. And then for you to realize, to be inspired to talk to her um and have that, have that be a stepping stone for you. And I can only imagine it was huge for her, like huge for her to be able to talk to someone who had a similar experience and was willing to, be compassionate and be there for her. That's incredible.
Yeah, Laura, one of the hardest things I've ever done was pick up that phone and call her because I just couldn't think of anything to say. I couldn't think of anything I could possibly do that would help her. But what I realize now through my, my training in grief and in coaching, wellness coaching, is that just sometimes just being there, just being a witness, being able to hear her story that so many people couldn't hear. And I went through the same thing after Glenn died. People don't want to hear about what I found when I found his body. People don't want to hear about the police and the Emmy, and they don't want to hear all those details. It's horrifying, especially people who cared about me. They don't want to get that close to that intense pain. And I don't blame anybody for that. We're not raised to do that. Unfortunately, our society is so poorly equipped to deal with trauma and tragedy and grief. We have very few educational tools, which is why David Kessler started his grief education program. I'm so grateful for it and his other programs. Because once you're educated, then you can help others. And even if you're not educated, you can help just by being there. Just don't try to fix it. Don't try to distract. Just sit. Just be present with the person. And that's what I could do. That's all I could do with her at the time, with my friend.
Well,
But I
and
was able to do it.
yeah, and that's amazing. And the thing is, even as you're talking about it, like the things that you're saying, like, okay, hard enough that you discovered his body. Okay, that's one thing. And then to deal with the police and the sirens and the no wonder there's a post-traumatic, you know, syndrome from that. No matter, no wonder, like the grief and again, these layers of just all of these things that there's just so much that and we don't know. And you're right, we aren't prepared. And I think a lot of times that I don't know so much now, maybe it's a little bit better, but just thinking back again to my experience with the as a younger child, growing up when family members did pass away, there wasn't a lot of talk about it. There wasn't a lot, and there, and then to just be kind of thrown into, the viewings or the whatever, and these things where people are like, no, you have to go up, you have to go up to the casket, and even for an adult that can be difficult, let alone if you're a child, and it's just expected, and there isn't a lot of, I don't know how people deal with it now. Thank goodness there are people like you in the world to help them, but to just be able to, you know, to be able to talk to somebody like you said, or to have somebody there, because we don't talk about
Yeah.
things. It's not there.
It's
Yeah.
because it's hard. Emotions are hard. Feelings are hard.
Mm-hmm.
They hurt, and we're a numbing society.
Hmm.
You know, who doesn't meet for a drink or need a drink to go out in public, or whatever other substance you're numbing with, sitting and vegging in front of the television. And I'm not saying those things are bad or wrong, but it's what we're conditioned to do rather than sit and feel. And that's one thing I love. So I'm Jewish. I was raised Jewish, and I love one of the ways that you're taught in Judaism to follow a death is that you sit Shiva. It's called sitting Shiva, and it's a week of feeling the feeling. You sit, in some traditions, you sit on the floor in dirty clothes, you don't take a shower. I don't follow that tradition, but, bless your heart. If that's what you do, that's okay. Um, but you sit and people come to you and they feed you and they grieve with you. And every night you have a prayer circle. And it is a week of just grief, just sitting and grieving and feeling the feelings. And then that goes on. There's different traditions that go on for the following month and following year, and very specific um, items to, activities that you do. And you are also remembered by the community
Hmm.
uh, that you're grieving. You stand in synagogue and everyone remembers, oh, they're still in grief. It's still the first year. So that you're supported by the community. And I am generalizing. Synagogues all over the world do different things, but
Hmm.
that's a general thing. And then at the end of the first year, you have what's called an unveiling, and you're released from your requirements, your primary mourner requirements, so you can go to celebrations and remarry if it was a spouse. And um, I really appreciate that about Judaism, but unfortunately, it's just not. Outside of a very small group, it's not sort of the daily conversation. You aren't educated in that. And part of it is emotional intelligence that we could be teaching in schools. It'd be great to teach emotional intelligence, mindfulness, like instead of being a victim of your emotions, which is what we are, which is why we numb, because we don't know how to sit in pain. We don't know how to just deal with suffering as part of our daily existence. Uh, until you're educated and practice mindfulness, and maybe some form of prayer, meditation, all these things can make it okay. Like, okay, I'm in pain right now. And the emotional intelligence piece of it, I don't want to just throw out all these terms, but without explaining what that means, is that you understand I am feeling anger right now,
Hmm.
but the anger isn't controlling you. You notice when you're feeling anger, I'm angry and that's my primary emotion right now. But underneath anger, you also have happiness, joy, sadness, sorrow, fatigue, all these other feelings. And if you study and practice emotional intelligence, you're able to be with your feelings rather than react when you feel your emotions are strong.
Yeah.
So that's probably the biggest educational tool that I use and help people with is it's okay to feel sad.
Yeah. Yeah. It's okay. And I think, I love what you said about the traditions of Judaism, because, you know, not having those experiences, it seems like very frequently, number one, we don't know what to say to someone. If somebody passes away, you really just don't know what to say other than, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for your loss." That's what else, like, which is great. I mean, it's an expression of how, that you are sorry for them. And I'm not taking away from that. But I think that there are these, everybody comes together for the services, and then everybody's gone. and that the people who are still close to that person are still grieving, and they're, all of us, you have this support for what, a few days, and then that's it. Well,
Yeah.
what happens after that? Where's the support after that? And I do know that I've heard a lot of people say, just, I even remember somebody in my high school, there was a car accident, a couple of the boys were killed, and I remember hearing the one boy's sister say, it's when we're setting the table and we're pulling out 4 plates instead of 5. It's not the expected things. You don't know what's going to hit you, and maybe you're good for however long, and then just a memory hits you, or a place that you go, or I'm sure it could be anything, whatever it
Mhm.
is. And so I think that's it's beautiful what you're saying as far as the support and allowing people to still be sad. You might be happy, perfectly happy yesterday, but today
Mhm.
you're sad today because whatever reason, because of the memories, because of whatever, you miss that person, whatever it is. So I think what you're doing is so important, and helping people in this way, it's incredible.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, I think it's a really important point that you bring up with we talked earlier about the concept of when have you arrived at healing, right? Or is it even possible to arrive at healing? And I think that that's a really good uh, point to visit. That there are, I call them sneak attacks. There's sneak attacks where you're just walking down the street, like you said, just setting the table. Your eyes glance at an item that your loved one prized. You walk by a restaurant you used to enjoy together. Um, it can be anything like that. Things fall off the shelf. That's one of my favorite. Like, oh, um, and what we need to realize is that building strength, building emotional intelligence, building self care into our daily practices, mindfulness, helps bring meaning to our suffering because we are stronger people and more able to deal with the waves, right? You can picture it like a wave. Like sometimes the sea's just nice and smooth and you're cruising, and then a big old wave will come from one of these um, reminders, like you were mentioning. And it can happen at any time, any year, you know. But I do believe that it gets easier if you do the work.
Mhm.
And the work is feeling the feelings, thinking about your loved one. In my case, writing. I'm a writer anyway, so I sort of have that piece, but anyone can be a writer. And one of the things I cannot recommend highly enough, is write the story. Because if you lose someone, one of the biggest fears is I'll forget them. I'll forget what they look like. I'll forget what they smell like. I'll forget what it felt like to be with that person. You don't forget it, but it does change because you change. You're growing and changing and having new experiences, and that person, your memories are, you won't make new memories with that person.
Mhm.
So the best thing, in my opinion, and if you're not a writer, you can vlog, make a video of yourself, or an audio if you can't stand video, but record in some way. Writing has its own neurological benefits, the physical act of writing with a pen, which I do sometimes. Mostly I type on my computer, but create the story, and it'll help you with feeling the memory. I've written about so many of my experiences with Glenn and with my mom, um, and it just brings it to life. And yeah, it might be painful when it brings it to life. I may be sobbing into my keyboard, which, but it's also helping clean out some of the pain and making room for the loving, joyful memories. So
Yeah.
I think writing about and just tell the story to a therapist or a grief coach like me. Telling the story, even if you have to tell it 10 times and it doesn't change, maybe the 11th time.
Mhm.
you'll get some relief, and you'll be able to get a little bit of the pain out and put in a little bit of the joyful memories.
Well, and I love that, and I also think as you're talking, what's coming to me is just journaling in general. Besides telling the story, maybe the memories that you have and writing those down, or like you said, recording them, but also journaling on your feelings. And it you know, I'm a big fan of journaling in general, and so get that out of your body. There's sometimes when, and I know a lot of people say, the counselors and different people say, if you're holding on to even anger, just write a letter to that person that you're angry about. You don't have to send it. It just gets it out of you. So the expression of it can be helpful. But like you're saying, the stories that you can write, that will be the reminders that you can go back and look and say, oh, I do remember that time we went to the beach, or we went on the vacation, and those were good memories. And maybe you can look back on those to see that, no, I don't have to have only these painful feelings. That I did have happy times with this person. And then the other thing I was thinking when you're talking about the self-care is that in general, we don't have enough self-care. We don't do that in general. So if you're in a place of grief, I would think that's even harder. If you're having a good day, we don't do enough self-care, most of us. And so if you're grieving and you just want to, maybe be under the covers for the day, the self-care is really, I would think, a struggle to. And like you're saying, just the step, what can you do, one thing for yourself to, and I would think that, I mean, sitting in the grief and wondering, why would it even matter? Like, if I go get a pedicure, that's not going to make me feel better. That's just silly in the big scheme of things. When somebody has lost their life, has passed away, no, that, but these are the things that are, these are important steps, like you're saying, to moving forward, to the growth, like as you
Yeah.
say. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It's
And
funny that you mentioned pedicure, because after my mom died, I just went to bed. I was in bed. We in Judaism, we have a funeral very soon, so the funeral was 2 days later, and then I just went and crawled. I went home and crawled into bed, and people were taking my kids to school and bringing food, and my husband was being very supportive, and I just let myself go, and uh, that was self care for that time.
mhm,
I think that what we need to do is look at what is self care.
mhm,
uh, Self care, the very core of self care that can be the most helpful is being okay with yourself.
mhm.
The hardest thing is if you're hard on yourself, along with trying to recover from a trauma or be in grief, you're just you're making it worse. And that's what we do, though. Self criticism, self blame, shame, guilt, all of those things, in my opinion, are self harm. And so self care might just be going, I'm okay because today I'm laying in bed crying, and that's all I can do today.
Mhm.
And then the pedicure story, so I went to bed. Sunday was the funeral. Monday night, there was a minion, so a prayer circle at my house, and I was in bed. And then Thursday, my friend came and she said, "You have to leave the house." And I said, "No, actually, I don't." I mean, I don't even know if I'd showered. I was that much of a wreck. All I could do was cry and not believe my mother was gone. And she made me get dressed and took me out to get a pedicure. And it wasn't about how pretty my toes looked. It wasn't that. It was that my friend was supporting me the way that she knew how.
Mhm,
She wasn't a sit in grief person, and that's okay. We all do what we can.
mhm.
Um, but it affected my nervous system in that I was touched lovingly. I had a little foot rub, right? Pedicure. And I was in a different environment. I wasn't just in my grief cave in my bedroom where I'd been crying for days. And
Mhm,
so there were so many layers to that type of self care,
mhm.
more than just the superficial, oh, my toes look pretty.
Right. And I agree with you as far as one of the things that my mentor, Joanna Hunter, always says is, just, check in with yourself and say, what is the most loving thing I can do for myself today?
Oh, I
So like
love
you,
that.
and so it could be, well, I need to take myself back to bed. That is what I need today. Or it might be, I need to do the dishes. I can't, stand this mess, and that'll take my mind off it. It could be a million different things. It could be make a grilled cheese sandwich. That's what I need. Like whatever it
Comfort
is.
food.
Yeah, whatever it is. But yeah, and that, to me, that applies to us all every day.
Right.
What do we really need for today? And not to use it as an excuse to not do your thing and not live your life, but yeah, what is the most loving thing I can do for myself today or right now?
Right. And most loving thing includes growth. It includes purpose. So it wouldn't be laying in bed doing nothing all day unless you're in a, post traumatic or grief
Mhm,
state, and you need to just stabilize, because that's the first step, is stabilizing.
mhm,
I want to revisit, if we can. You had mentioned about people sort of falling off after the first few days and weeks. And I want to go back to that, and just, if anyone who's listening is supporting a griever, someone in grief, keep reaching out. I want to emphasize that as much as I can. Grief doesn't have a timeline, as we all know. So it may be that you reached out every month for 3 months and that person never got back to you. So you figure, they're doing their thing, whatever, they're fine. They're not fine. Keep trying. This
mhm,
isn't about whether you feel ghosted or not. This is about this person who's suffering. And if you had a friendship before, it may be changed going forward because this person is different, because grief changes us. But please keep reaching out, because you never know when that setting the table, or that picture, or the thing that falls off the bookshelf, you never know when that's going to happen. It might be 6 months, it might be a year. I actually was just talking to a friend of mine last week who had a friend in grief, and she was like, I reached out over 6 months and she just never responded. And
mhm.
so, and now this was 6 months later. I said, so you haven't heard from her in 6 months? No. I said, reach out again. You don't know where she was 6 months ago. You don't know when she's going to be able to accept support from you. Sometimes you're not even ready to accept support. And sure enough, she sent me a text a few days later and said, I reached out and my friend responded, and we're going out for coffee next week.
Oh,
So
great.
she was thinking their friendship's over, whatever. And it's like, no, you have to understand, grief is like an illness. If your friend broke their leg, after a month, you wouldn't be saying, come on, let's go running together. We need to go running. And if we don't go running, then you're not my friend anymore. You don't do that.
Yeah.
So it may be that this person just wasn't emotionally healed enough to be able to do something social, even go to coffee.
Mhm.
So just keep reaching out. Don't expect a response. Just keep reaching out. It'll come. So I just really wanted to circle back to that, and emphasize to anyone who's listening, who's supporting someone in grief. A day, a week, a month, it's just not enough time.
Yeah.
Keep trying. Even years later, I have a friend who lost her husband 3, 4 years ago, and we weren't close friends, but being a widow, and watching her go into widowhood, um, I just keep reaching out. Hey, hope you're doing well. I recommended some books to her and some support groups, and I'm just gonna keep reaching out. And if she never responds, it's okay. She knows I'm here if she needs me for those setting the table days.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I actually, I love that you said that, because I think a lot of times people don't know, like, that you do think, oh well, I tried and I tried and I tried, and I guess they just don't want to be friends with me, but which isn't the case. That's a story for us, making up for ourselves, and you don't know what
Right.
that person is going through. And so yeah, just keep, being there to be their support. But I also, as I'm, thinking about it, you had so many instances of loss, and obviously starting at a young age. And to go back to a funny thing happened on the way to my life, I think sometimes when we look back, those are stepping stones to who you are now. They did change. Your path went this way and then it went that way, but for whatever reason in your life you experienced multiple close losses, and it's given you this great place to be now that you've brought yourself to. That it just didn't plop you there. You didn't just show up here one day. You've worked through it, and you've worked through a lot of things to get here. But it's just amazing that this is where your path has led you, so that you have this. And the books you've written and the one coming out, and to be able to help people in such an incredible way. These are the things that this is what it's about, is the you know connecting the threads, if you will, of our life, of all these experiences clearly impacted you and impacted your life. And you could have gone a different way. You could have made a different choice, but your choice was to do this and to help other people, which is, yeah, amazing to me.
Well, to be honest, Laura, I'm really not that amazing, but thank you. Um, what I did was it's like when life hands you lemons kind of thing. I was dealt this hand, and I personally don't like to suffer. I like to feel good. I like to embrace the joy in life and have fun and play and dance and sing and be with my friends and just be joyful.
Mhm.
And it's a really hard place to get to when you're in your grief cave laying on the floor crying all day. Um, so I really, a lot of it was just my drive to suffer less, to feel better, because feeling bad feels bad. So that was really a big part of it. Was and then the helping others. It was because they could see that, oh, I'm living my life. It might not look like joy, but I am getting out of bed every day. I'm getting my kids to school. I'm getting dinner on the table and getting my kids to their activities. When you have three little kids, you're a really busy human being. And they could see I was surviving it. Can't necessarily say I was thriving, but so it really was more that drive to just not feel terrible all the time that brought me into, I was already into yoga, but brought me further into yoga to learn to be a yoga therapist, that brought me into meditation and mindfulness studies, that brought me into, I'm also an Ayurvedic lifestyle teacher, which is a sister science to yoga, deals with the, eating, the way that you eat and the way that, daily activities. Um, and each of these things provided a nugget of relief to me, provided a nugget of ability to just deal with every day, and ultimately the strength to support others who are going through difficult times. And I still have difficult times. I still have wet days. They just aren't as devastating. And I approach them from a mindfulness perspective of, what am I learning from this pain? I am suffering right now because I have a growth opportunity. And that's exactly how I look at it. I have a growth opportunity right now. It doesn't feel good, but I can learn something from this experience that is causing me suffering.
Yeah, I love that. That's really it. So many times that is the case, that if we look at the challenges in our life, or the pain that we're in, or whatever the situation is, if we can frame it that way, reframe it that way, if that's what you want to call it. What can I learn from this? What can I learn from my pain or from this experience? And how can I grow from this? That's huge. It's huge. And are you still a yoga teacher, instructor? Do you still offer that?
I do. I do. I have a goofy class that I teach on Sunday mornings called Grown Yoga. It's on Zoom, where it's mostly women about my age. There's there can be a variety of different people, but we are, in the grown years, and I'm talking about GROAN. So I leave us all I off of mute so that we can interact and talk and it's
I
actually very
love it.
very fun. I just moved it to 9:30 Pacific on Sundays, and I don't know, the summer, now that COVID is lightening up and people are getting back to studios, the attendance has dropped, and I don't know if I still want to, if it's still serving people, because I'd rather have people outside or in company, live company than in front of their computers, and I'm sure they would be too. So we'll see. And then there's three other classes I teach each week that are more my uh, service, and that is they're adaptive classes. So we're sitting. This is yoga therapy. So we're sitting in chairs part of the time. Although don't think for a minute that means it's an easy class, because but most of the people need some adaptation to their yoga practice because of a physical situation, a mobility challenge like MS, Parkinson's, hip replacements. Some people have just beaten up their bodies with athletics all their lives, so they have a knee or a shoulder they need to care for. And so I teach, that's a group class that I teach 10 a.m. Pacific Monday, Wednesday, and then 11 on Saturdays. And again, that, as we're getting into summer and people are getting out more, the schedule may be changing, but if someone wanted to come to one of my classes, you can go to my website, inhabitjoy.com, or send me an email. But those are great. And then my yoga therapy mostly stems from the adaptive class. So I'll work with people one on one, allowing whatever physical situation they're in to lead, to guide the therapy. So it's like physical therapy, but in with yoga principles. So sometimes I just need people to take a deep breath. That's what they need the most. So that's what we focus on in our therapeutic sessions.
I love all of that. Uh, the adaptive yoga, the like chair yoga, or what those types of classes. I know those are really also beneficial. Like my mother's older, and she has done some of those classes, and I
Mm.
think the last few years have been challenging for a lot of people, but older people as well, who used to get out and go and do those things, and to be able to maybe find them online now, and know where to go to find somebody online. I know some of them are, like you said, coming back to live classes, but not fully
Yeah.
yet, some of them. And it's really important uh, to be able to reach these people, even if it is in their homes, so that they do keep moving and, just not let your body just
Yeah.
stiffen up.
Well, when we first went, when the studio closed, and the studio where I was teaching adaptive yoga actually closed permanently during the first month of COVID. They were like, "This isn't going to happen." For they had the foresight to know that we weren't going to be closed for 2 weeks. So bless their hearts, my students figured out. Most of them had never done Zoom before, and the first few months was all tech support. They all had my phone number. They were calling, "How do I get on Zoom? What's this, download?" And I mean, it was, oh my gosh, I was so inspired just watching them get over the hurdle of trying to get on Zoom to do yoga. And then, I created a bundle that I would send everyone with the equipment. We use blocks and TheraBands, and make sure they have a stable sticky mat. We use chairs, like I mentioned, but they have to be supportive chairs that you can get in and out of without handles. So, it was a lot of setup time, and they are still coming 2 years later. We have a wonderful community. We chat before and after class, and everyone supports each other. It's really um, just a supportive, tight knit community. It's so wonderful. And we've welcomed new people. Some of these people in my class I've never met in person.
Yeah.
And some people have had to go do other things. And so it's a dynamic group, but just absolutely wonderful. And a lot of these people want to stay online because, for people who, for example, walk very, very slowly or have a lot of challenge walking, not having to park in the parking lot and then walk the block to the studio, which uses up half their energy for yoga, has been a real blessing. So some of them really want to stay online to preserve their energy, and so it's interesting. I'm just kind of open to see what happens.
Yeah, there has been a lot of people who wouldn't have learned the tech have learned the tech, and I do like,
Hmm.
again, my mother, she was pretty decent with it before that. She was, at least using a computer and using her iPhone and things, but definitely learned all the Zoom calls and the Facebook calls because all of her meetings went online and church went
Yeah,
online. But yeah, I would love for her to, I'm going to actually recommend that she find you to try to do yoga, because she used to go all the time. and
that's so
it's
great.
just
What's your mom's name?
Juanita.
Juanita. Okay. Well, Juanita is welcome to join us.
And maybe her friends as well, right? Let's see if
Sure.
too. But
I've
yeah.
actually had people do group classes where they don't necessarily want to join a class that's already in session. If they have, like a bridge club or something, and they have 4 to 6 people and they just want to do it themselves, if I have room in my calendar, I'm always happy to support that too. So,
That's awesome. Yeah, I would imagine some people maybe are a little bit shy about joining a group that's already intact,
mhm.
but they would maybe feel more comfortable with their group of friends to do it. Yeah, I love that. That's really nice.
Yeah. And
Um,
I love working with people in yoga. I really thought I was done teaching group classes a couple years ago. I was kind of, because I'm doing so much more coaching and writing, and that's sort of the focus. But when COVID hit, I felt like I couldn't leave my people. I mean, they really wanted to keep going, and there was no studio. So I just kept teaching, and they keep coming to class. So I'm still teaching group yoga. So, it's a funny thing that happened on the way to my life. I'm still teaching group classes, and then as long as they keep coming, I'm gonna show up too.
yeah, we just keep shifting and changing and meeting the needs, and it's
Yeah.
wonderful. What's next? What do we do next? What do we do about this one? How do we solve this next challenge? And you have definitely met your challenges and worked on them, and now to turn around and help other people in so many ways. What is and well, maybe you don't want to share just yet, but what is the name of your book that's coming out?
Well, I'm working with the publisher on that, like we authors do. But it will be, some of the words in the title will be a mindful guide to spouse partner suicide loss. So it's a very specific book about losing your partner or your spouse to suicide.
Okay.
And it's using mindfulness tools, emotional intelligence, all the things that I've mentioned in this podcast, including yoga, faith.
Hmm.
It's important if our faith, that's another thing we didn't touch on that earlier. There are some religions that shame suicide loss or suicide, and therefore the people who go through suicide loss are not supported by their religion, and it's very difficult. And so I'm recording a podcast. It's my dad. Hi, Dad.
Dad.
uh, yeah, so that is another one of the big differences between a non-suicide loss and a suicide loss is there can be a lot of shame in your community. So um, hopefully this book will help everyone. That even if it just helps a few people, I'm going to be happy about that. I'm going to be like we were talking about earlier, it'll reach the people that it needs to. And I'm hoping that it'll help uh, support people going through suicide loss.
Well, and I think that's interesting that you bring up religion, because when you started to say that, and I didn't know where you were going to go with it, I was thinking that a lot of people actually do well because of their faith, because of what their beliefs are when they lose someone. But I hadn't thought about the opposite of that, where, yeah, especially with, with this, with suicide, loss to suicide, that people would be shamed for it. And I hadn't thought of that side of it.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, if your church was your place of support and community, and then your spouse dies by suicide and there's no support there for that, that would be really tough. I did not experience that, but I've read about it, and I know it exists.
Well, and again, another layer of hurting, to be, especially, just, I would imagine, feeling really betrayed at that level when are part of of whatever the religion is, and feel like those really should be your support group, and those are the people that you've been part of or trusting, and especially in a loss situation, challenging situation, whatever it is, and then they just, no, we're not going to be there for you. That would just, in my mind, be a huge betrayal on top of whatever you're already experiencing. So yeah,
It
that would,
it does add an additional layer of suffering for sure.
yeah, I would imagine it does. So, let Dad's looking for you. So let's
I know. He's so cute.
I know, I love it.
I love my dad.
I hope you
He's
didn't just
great.
think you were out, out here talking to yourself for this whole time. Like, who are you talking to? But I think this is a
I'll
great
find out.
place. Yeah, yeah. I think this is a great place to just to wrap up. And a huge gratitude for you for sharing all your stories with us, and just remind us. I know you mentioned it, but what your website is, and I'll have everything in the show notes. But where people can find you, if when they're looking for you and wanting to join that yoga class or help with some grief support.
Yeah, all the information, my contact information and everything is at inhabitjoy.com.
Great. Well, again, thank you so much, Michelle. I love talking with you and hearing your story. It's so inspiring, and
Thank you.
I hope our listeners as well. Thank you for listening today, and I hope you're inspired by Michelle's stories.
And thank you, Laura, for doing what you do.
I appreciate that. Thank you for listening to A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to My Life podcast. For more information, visit my website at www.lauramuirhead.com.